First of all, thank you all for being here. It is a pleasure today to have with us Professor Mihaela. I would like to introduce her, even if it doesn't like me to introduce her too long. Professor Schaar is a John Humphrey Plummer Professor of Machine Learning, Artificial Intelligence and Medicine at the University of Cambridge. In addition to leading the Schaar Lab, Mihaela is founder and director of the Cambridge Center for AI in Medicine. She has received a number of awards to papers and to career that would fill the entire time of the talk, so I will avoid to list them all. But I would like to mention that Mihaela is personally credited as inventor of 35 US patents, many of which are still frequently cited and adopted in standards, international standards. She has made over 45 contributions to international standards, for which she received 3 ISO awards. And in 2019, an ESA report determined that she was the most cited female AI person in it. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for the kind invitation. I'm sorry for the glitch in the beginning. I couldn't make up my mind what to talk to you about, but let's go back to the original talk so that you are hopefully not too disappointed. So really what I wanted to talk about today is how can you use data and AI to do true scientific discovery. And I start by saying true scientific discovery as opposed to really drug discovery. Of course, we hear a lot about drug discovery with AI, and this is, again, very important. But as we know, I often like to give this example, when Fleming discovered penicillin, he knew it worked, but he didn't know why. The focus is not to try to do discovery of drugs, which is important, but often opaque. The focus here will be more to use data to do scientific discovery in the form of physiology, pharmacology, or maybe physics or macroeconomics. And what happens? Murphy's law. Okay, now it's up. So I put this presentation together actually because I was fortunate to be invited to be the Spinoza guest professor at the University of Amsterdam. And then I said, oh my God, I need to read something about Spinoza. And what I thought was quite interesting was, I read quite a lot, and it's not available online. So I really would advise reading this treatise on theology and politics, which is actually quite amusing, quite provoking, even so many centuries later. And he says, so I conclude that nothing happens in the nature that doesn't follow from its law. And well, I'm not surprised why he was really banned from all sorts of churches, synagogues, and all sorts of, he never ended up really in a position of power, partly because of his controversial thoughts and very powerful thoughts today. And he was very, very obsessed, if you like, with discovering law. And when I started to do work in machine learning, initially I wanted to do decision support. I didn't care so much about science. And often I got this pushback that, hey, you are finding all these predictions, but we don't learn something we don't know. There is nothing new that machine learning really provides. So what I decided to do in the last couple of years is, in addition to, doing more conventional machine learning, to also try to focus on building tools using machine learning that can enable us to have new understanding and new findings. So, as I mentioned, not AI for drug discovery, but rather AI to discover scientific laws. And this is, I'm very obsessed with medicine, but I think that some of these tools can be applied in other areas, whether it's finance, macroeconomics, whether it's climate change. And I always start with this slide saying, well, what does this mean to have laws? And in my mind, one of the things we would like to discover is governing equations, which are of the type highlighted here. Again, ordinal differential equations, partial differential equations, and ideally discover such laws from data. And why do we want them? We want them because they generalize outside the data set. We like them because we can understand system stability, for instance. We like them because we can understand what variables are important and how they change over time. So in our lab, with a variety of absolutely amazing students, we started to develop the first fully transparent methods for time series forecasting. Funny enough, that's quite challenging, so I will not talk about that today, but no other field before came up with methods to really come up with true transparent time series model. And we have some first ideas on how to do that, which is the first paper highlighted here. But what I'll talk more about today is dynamical systems in the form of ODEs and PDEs. I'm also going to do something else. I'm going to make a bold statement. And the reason I'm so courageous to make this bold statement is because I made it around a year and a half ago in front of Judea Pearl, who is my former colleague at UCLA. And he didn't shoot me down. So I thought, okay, let me go. I can have the courage to put this bold statement. So as you may know, Judea has been very instrumental in really enabling us to think in new ways about causality. My ways of thinking about causality originated more in the statistical literature work of Lion Robbins, which I absolutely love. But what I'm going to say here is, which the engineers in the room will love me, everybody else will hate me, so we'll be up for a debate at the end. I wanted to put a ladder similar to that Judea put the causality ladder, and what I claim is that the last, let's say, maybe not the last, but one of higher order, if you like, rank on this ladder, it is not causality. It is not causality as we know in computer science, where we know that, for instance, there are causal graphs, but rather we need to move one step further. And I'm going to claim that dynamical systems under interventions is the right way to think about let's say, an even higher order way of thinking about interventions and scientific discovery. And the reason I'm going to make that claim is that often causality right now doesn't think enough or correctly about time. That's number one. Number two is that often in causality, as we know it in computer science, and for that matter in statistics, at times is really not considering non-parametric and parametric relationships about how these variables are impacting each other over time. But dynamical systems are a way maybe to think about that. So a little bit controversial, but hopefully you'll engage with me in debate. And I'm going to tell you about some initial work we have done to try to bridge the work of dynamical systems and the work of causality. We are not there yet, so hopefully I'll make some converts among some of you to help us move forward. And at least I will intrigue a few others. So the plan for today is to talk about discovering these hidden laws, understand dynamical systems under interventions, and probably I don't have time, but I'll just tell you one word about something even more controversial than what I said about causality, which is that maybe we don't need equations at all. And do we really need equations, since many people who want to understand these discoveries can't read these very complex equations that dynamical systems or partial differential equations provide. Okay, so where are we in AI and machine learning in terms of discovery? We are not very far. I really would like to convince most of you no longer to use sharp line learning to explain, in trying to really have, so very often when we do a machine learning black box prediction, we claim to be able to understand it purely because we put some type of interpretability method post hoc. I used to do it myself, so I'm guilty of it. We invented something that I think it's even more flexible and more scalable than SHAP, which is called Invase. But still, this is not a discovery. It's just telling post hoc what features are important. Ideally, what you would like to do is to do something like you do in regression, where you have a two equation, a linear equation that tells you how these variables are going to be interconnected with the outcome of it. So, and this is, of course, for static prediction. So again, a few years back, we wanted to see, can we really come up with ways to discover from data nonlinear rather than linear equations associated with static forecasting, whether it's time to event or prediction. And we came up with this concept that is based on symbolic equations that we call meta model. So the reason I always talk about that is we no longer need to do sharp or line. We have methods now to be comparable with regressions in terms of transparency. We can have equations. But this is, again, not satisfying because almost everything that's of interest in medicine, and for that matter, the world, is dynamic. So what about time? Well, it's interesting to me, but for many years, people didn't focus on trying to build interpretability methods for time series. So together with a former student, we started to look at, can methods such as the static methods be used for understanding time series trajectory? And even prior to our work, there was a lot of evidence in the machine learning community that taking methods that were developed for static settings, such as, again, sharp or line, are not useful if you want to understand feature importance over time. So what we did is we built a method called Dynamas, which is based on perturbation analysis, to really understand better how trajectories really are important for a particular prediction. And maybe even more crazy, we started to build attention mechanisms that are generalizations of hidden Markov models, hidden semi-Markov models, hidden variable order semi-Markov models, to try to learn the importance of history in making a particular forecast. But this is not discovery. This is, if you like, some form of understanding of how time, or histories, have played a role in this forecast. So this is not really what we want. And I often say this not to a crowd like yours, but more to the typical conventional computer science machine learning crowd, that time is really the new frontier in machine learning, and we don't have enough methods to really help us think correctly about time. And I'm trying to excite the machine learning community to think about time. The engineers, the mathematical engineers, are very convinced about it, but machine learners are not. So initially, when we started this, we talked about ordinal differential equations, and this was hard enough. And again, I put this slide yesterday, but I put it again today for the people who have not been yesterday, to say, well, why do we care about ODEs? We care about ODEs because we want to understand, for instance, in medicine, how drugs evolve in the body. We like PK models, PD models. We also want to understand how regulatory models are operating in our body. They are all examples of ordinal differential equations. But also, if you think about epidemiology, population dynamics, they are all, if you like, examples of ordinal differential equations. Okay, so discovering ordinal differential equations from data is kind of tricky, and the reason it's tricky is because these derivatives are not in the data. And hence, we need to learn, estimate that on the basis of messy, not very clean data. Data that may have noise, is regularly sampled, and so on. So originally, the way we kind of thought about that was giving a data set, which can be a set of trajectories of different sizes and with different types of sampling levels. And let's try to see if we can discover on the basis of this data dynamical systems in the form of transparent ordinal differential equations. Now, of course, there is this amazing idea, which is symbolic regression, and my guess is most of you are familiar with it, but it has its challenges when applied to the previous problem. And the challenges tend to be the fact that if the data is messier, we have limited data, systems are chaotic, it doesn't work, or it doesn't work very well. And most of the time it fails. also interesting for the machine learners in the room is that neural ODs have a lot of problems as well. So they are black box and do even worse than symbolic regression. And the reason they do even worse than symbolic regression is that they are trying really to solve this inverse value problem. So they are very, very sensitive to estimating the initial function. So the earliest work that we did that I highlighted yesterday already a little bit is trying really to find a way to estimate these derivatives from data in a more systematic. And together with Zhaoji and Krzysztof, two brilliant students in the lab, Zhaoji since then graduated, we started to see how to do that. And the insight that we have had was the fact that in order to kind of estimate directly this derivative, what we need to do is to use variational calculus, the variational formulation of OD. And I'm not going to put it in front of you, partially because I want to show you other ways that we can go about it. But what is interesting here is that we do a change of variable. So what we do in order to circumvent this estimation of a derivative is we consider functionals, and these functionals can be designed by us. And they need to have certain properties for us to be able to transfer the initial problem into a new problem where we can easily estimate the derivative. And these functionals cannot be just anything. They need to have these properties. In our paper, we go through a series of proofs to really show what properties they need to have. But for the engineers in the room, again, it's quite nice to know that the sign functions, the sign bases are actually very powerful bases that we can use to learn. So then we no longer need to estimate the derivatives. We can make this change of variables and do very easily estimation of the underlying function. Now, you will say, okay, so what have you learned? The problem of finding a true discovery is challenging because if you have something that you don't know that exists in the real world, it's very difficult to say, okay, unless somebody is going to the lab and verifies this discovery, we don't know whether what we discovered is correct. So initially, when we did decode, we started to do a lot of systems where we sampled from something we do know, and we assume what happens is we have more errors, less errors, more data, less data, and see if we can indeed discover something that we already knew. What was more interesting, though, was to say, well, what happens if I do not know the underlying thing? Can I discover something? So at the time, we scratched our head and we ended up looking at a set of clinical trials for response of chemotherapy on tumor volume. And we discovered, together with Decode, which is our system, as well as with symbolic regression, underlying dynamical system. And what you see there is that Decode has actually a somewhat simpler equation that it discovers, and is capable to show this effect of recurrence in this example. There are many, many examples in the paper, but I just took one just to show to you that this equation that we discovered is actually a lot more similar to what's really observed in the real world. Now, this is good, but we don't know whether what we discover is correct. So one of the first things we did is we said, okay, after we discovered this method, can we find scientists in the real world that can join forces with us to validate whether what we discovered is correct? And the world that we found, and I'm curious about your experience, whether you found scientists that are eager to collaborate and eager to verify discoveries, the community that we discovered was pharmacology. So what you will see quite a lot in the next slides is applied to pharmacology, not because these methods apply only to pharmacology, they apply to other areas, but pharmacologists have labs, they test equations, they try to learn dynamical systems from data, so they are fantastic collaborators for that. So as I said yesterday, and I'm going to kind of summarize and then the talk will diverge from yesterday, so don't worry if you have seen the talk yesterday. But what we have done following this work was to see, do we need mathematics to be able to discover such dynamical? Can large language models do the same thing? And what we were able to show is that yes, you can use agent-based models based on large language models to discover such dynamical systems equations from data. And they have advantages as opposed to our more mathematical framework, because while both decode and symbolic regression can only deal with limited number of variables, and the space of equations grows super exponentially when we have both discrete and continuous components. If we have large language models, they are able quite well to stick to a large amount of variables and discover the variables that are important, as well as the models that are important. So what we ended up doing is building this agent model that has multiple components, multiple sets. At every iteration, what this model is doing is we start with a problem. The problem is, here is the data, and we would like to discover a dynamical system that best fits this data. In this case, our goal was to discover both a white box model, but also a hybrid model, meaning that we wanted to discover the best possible white box model that is the data. But if the model is misspecified, we wanted the agent to also find the hybrid model. So meaning the residual was fitted using a neural network, which was not trained in conventional way, but rather discovered by the large language model. So again, what are the different steps? After the problem description, a first model is actually created on the basis of this description. This model usually is not very good. It's evaluated on the basis of the data. Then we have a subcomponent that's assessing what features may be important. This can inject information from paper, but it will be completely data-driven. And then there is a reflection step, which tries to reason about the different components. And a second iteration is happening. As we are having more and more models, the question becomes how to use these models, how to hybridize these models, and also how to select additional features to include or to exclude from this model. So what's interesting is now we have, if you like, a very almost human-like methodology to have models that are hybridized, to decide what variables to include, to decide how useful the different models are to be evolved further, and which ones need to be kind of removed from consideration, and which ones deserve to be kept further. So the reasoning process associated with this is quite sophisticated and quite interesting. But in the end, it's just, if you like, an agent evolving over time and fitting better and better models from the basis of the data. And what you end up with at every stage is a program, which is a symbolic program that's interpreted. So it's a true equation that you can inspect. And if you want, we didn't do that, but if you want, you can put a human in the loop at every stage, and they could steer this process as well. What was surprising to me is that not only in pharmacology, but in many other cases, this large language model agent was able to find a dynamical system, system, which was very high performant. And it was more so even in scenarios like the one presented here, where for many years people have tried to build better models in pharmacology for warfarin, which is a drug that very well used in many, many settings, but for which the pharmacokinetic models are still not very well understood. So we discovered a better model than what exists today. And also this is the white box model. And then we looked at, can the machine learning model even better fit the residual? And that led to a hybrid model, which was even better. And we are working with pharmacologists to try to improve. So interesting to me and somewhat I need to say I had mixed feelings for quite some time about it, because I thought, it's kind of weird. We spent all these years to try to come up with some mathematical formalism, and then suddenly this model seems to be quite good at discovering this type of models. And trust me, this is not the case that these models have seen this data. We tried many other scenarios, including some that definitely were not in the public domain, just to make sure that indeed we are able to discover in different other sets such ordinary differential equations. And here are a few examples. Now, okay, this is good. Can we discover partial differential equation? And here, let me start with the final story. We still don't know whether large language models can discover. So here is a place, at least, where there is a space for us. And this was a problem that we struggled a lot. So can we discover on the basis of data partial differential? And first, why do we care about partial? I'm not a mathematician, I'm an engineer. So I don't care about mathematics unless it's useful. But PDEs are very useful. I don't think I need to convince you in the room, but the computer scientists need to be convinced. I put this slide for the computer scientists among you. PDEs are really useful, not only for the love of math, and they are very useful in medicine among many others. So we really want to discover PDEs. But PDEs are nasty. And the reason this is difficult is also the search space are much more difficult than for ODEs. And this idea that we had to make a change of basis, if you like, to have this variational tree, it doesn't work. So, or it may not always work. So this was a problem. Luckily, again, I have Krzysztof and Georgi, Krzysztof being a mathematician. And really, we needed to build quite a lot of mathematics to be able to do that. But I want to just tell you the key insight and where we are, because this problem is not completely solved. It's only partially. I'm showing it to you here in the hope that some of you will like it and will completely solve it or move the border further. So what we ended up with is the realization that PDEs have a derivative bound part and derivative free part. And the derivative free part is actually fantastic. We don't need to worry about it. Yeah? So we can evaluate it directly from data. We don't need to put any constraints. It can be as nasty and as crazy as we'd like. We can deal with that. On the other hand, the derivative bound part, we can deal with it and we can discover using machine learning PDEs only if this derivative bound part allows us to apply the variational. It was what we did before. Yeah? So trying to be able to come up with a variational formulation of PDEs, to be able to discover bases and be able to solve the problem, hence very easily. And it is this joint, if you like, relationship that leads to what we call variational ready PDEs, which is, as far as we know, the broadest class of PDEs for which we can use machine learning to discover PDEs from data. Now, the algorithms that we have to build to learn that are actually quite complex and quite sophisticated. It is not so easy. So among them, we need to have a quite fancy optimization algorithm, which is this optimization algorithm called Holt here. But we do have a way to solve it, and we are able to discover this variational ready PDEs. Again, a lot more needs to happen here. So for the few among you in the room that love PDEs, we hope that maybe you join forces with us to push the boundary even further from where we are today. Let me now talk briefly about causality and the relationship. So why are we so interested in it? The reason we are interested in it in medicine is because we want to understand the effect of intervention. So far we understood dynamical systems without the intervention. But if we have interventions in the form of treatments, we want to know, for instance, how to treat, when to stop. And this is, of course, a problem that we know has causal effect influence, or times we dealt with of an abuse, we call it individualized treatment effects from data. So we want to have observational data, such as electronic health records, with and without intervention, and try to estimate from it what will be the effect of interventions over time. Now, what do we have at our disposal? We have static variables, we have time series data, and we have interventions that are applied over time. We also know what has happened to this. So we have the outcome associated with it. However, these outcomes are only known for the factual. We do not know what has happened. What would have happened if we would have treated this patient differently. So among the many problems that we have in causality is the fact that we don't have the counterfactuals in the data. Another problem that we have is the fact that we need to deal with time-dependent confounders. Yeah. So these time-dependent confounders are nothing else than, in the case of medicine, variables, covariates that are affected by the past treatments, which in turn affect the response to future. And you see here one such, if you like, time-dependent confounding, and the mess that it creates, even if I have 2 steps. I have many steps, huge problem. So what did the world of computer science say about it? In my opinion, very little. But the world of statistics said a lot, and for many decades. So there is amazing work by Lionel Robbins. There is work by Miguel Hernán, where they have built, for instance, marginal structural models to deal with problems. So I, as a machine learner, was quite inspired by their work. And initially, we tried to take their work and just make it more flexible. So we created deep learning representations for marginal structural models, where we replace statistics with recurrent neural networks. So this is older work from 2018. Then we discovered that both marginal structural models as well as recurrent marginal structural models are actually very fragile. If you don't have a lot of data, we have a lot of issues. So we said, well, maybe we shouldn't deal with this whole problem of covariate shift propensity scoring, like statistic world is doing, but maybe we should adopt more modern ideas. And what we did is we ended up in this paper called CRN, stands for counterfactual recurrent network. We ended up doing something that's actually very, very powerful in machine learning, which is dealing with adversarial training. So we adjust for the covariate shift to domain adversarial. Then we said, okay, we do a little bit better, but there are still issues. And some of the issues that we had were the fact that if the data is irregularly sampled, these models are not very good at dealing with this irregularly sampled. So what we ended up doing was putting some type of temporally controlled differential equations there to deal with irregular samples. Okay, then we realized that if we have limited data, this is still not enough. Then we wanted to deal with informatively sampled data. So what happens if the data is actually present and absent, but informative? Can we learn from that? And we have done some of it. So, okay, we kept ourselves busy for quite some time, but I was not able to convince clinicians at all that this is useful, and for good reason. And the reason people were not convinced is because these methods were quite high accuracy, but they are not interpreted. They are black box methods. Another issue is that, again, in medicine, the data is irregularly sampled, and we were dealing in quite unsatisfactory way with this irregularly sampled. The biggest problem of all, though, in my opinion, is the fact that both the world of machine learning and the world of statistics makes absurd assumptions about this problem to be able to solve it. And everybody in this world, whether it's statistician or machine learner, makes these assumptions. Most of these assumptions are not testable, and the ones that are testable almost never fall. And we ignore that and we move on. But we make this assumption such that nobody can. So at some moment in time, I said to my students, okay, this is enough. We're no longer working in this area. But then something positive happened. We were working on dynamical systems and we were discovering the ordinal differential equations, partial differential equations, and we were getting very excited about it. And then suddenly in one of our group meetings, we said, well, why don't we use this idea to connect with the world of causality? So we had an aha moment by putting people together. So you see again the usual suspects, Krzysztof and Zhao. But then I had and Sam, they were working all in discovering dynamical systems, and I put them together with Jeroen Berghut, who was a computer scientist working on this work of causality. So we realized that we can create a first bridge where this ODE discovery can be now used for causal discovery. So let me tell you kind of what was the basic idea. The basic idea is that now we are trying to discover ODEs that are personalized for every individual. And it is this method, if you like, now that is the one that we are going to use to estimate with and without intervention the response of an individual to an intervention. So what we are going to try to do is we are going to learn on the basis of the same data set that we used to do deep learning on, an underlying system of ODEs that is going to represent the trajectory of the disease, if you like, with or without intervention for every individual. So what has this as an advantage? So we apply the same methods that we were presenting to you at the beginning of the talk, decode, two-step symbolic regression, to learn such dynamical systems. But now we are learning it in a personalized way. So first, it's the world of personalization. And then there are some other issues associated with interventions. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But what has as an advantage is that now we have an equation that is the one that is provided to tell you how the system will, the individual will respond under interventions. So we are interpretable. We have a true discovery. What's also nice is that irregular sampling is absolutely not a problem for decode or symbolic regression. You can deal with that by design. And very interestingly, and this is, I think, exciting, but we are at the beginning of this journey, we make totally different assumptions than the world of causality. And I feel at least that these assumptions are still sticky, but a lot more palatable than the world of causality. I will not tell you about them because they are very, very tricky to discuss unless you know a lot about causality. But if you are interested in, and you're a causality person, please come and say hi and let's discuss them. I also want to tell you that it's somewhat positive, the fact that we can have an algorithm. We built an algorithm to do that. And this algorithm is not perfect, but seems to be quite decent. And we call this algorithm InSight. And again, this is not exactly decode or symbolic regression because we have intervention. So we really need to do something a little bit different than we did for decode. But we are able to encode these interventions correctly. And again, it was tricky because we need to deal with, in the world of causality, not only with binary intervention, but also potentially continuous interventions or possibly multiple interventions. And part of the reason I don't show to you how we did it, it is quite complex if you want to do it for more than just binary intervention. Okay, so it seems that there is some magic, not completely explained, that allows you to unify this world of dynamical systems with the world of causality. What I'd like to achieve after this talk is that as many people who come from the world of dynamical systems say, this is interesting. Let me look at this paper and let me see if we can move further the ball and hopefully kind of change the world of causality. I really feel that's time for the mathematicians that come from an engineering point of view to move to causality. In my opinion, and the statisticians in the room will shoot me down, I think the work has been stuck for decades without moving the needle. Computer science has not done much in the area of time series. So it's a chance now for the engineers, maybe, and mathematical engineers to come and maybe do something in causality. And I'm very optimistic about it. I think it's hard, but I'm very optimistic. And I hope some of you will get excited and help us move forward. Now, I'm not going to complete this, but I just wanted to tell you that one thing that also ended up as a debate in our lab was what is really transparency? Are these equations transparent? And in discussions with clinicians, in discussion with all sorts of other people, we realized that nobody is going to look at these equations and really do discovery on the basis of them. They are often way too complex. So together with one of my mathematician students, we wrote actually a paper that's just going to appear at the end of this month at iClear, which we call very controversial, especially for a mathematician, no equations needed, learning system dynamics without relying on force formulae. And what we are trying to do here is we are saying, well, you can come up with very interesting representations of dynamical systems. But in the end, what you end up doing on the basis of this is trying to analyze system behavior. And what you end up in the end with is some type of semantic representation of motives, of change under potential intervention. So what we propose in this work is not to have necessarily symbolic form, but rather semantic representation. So this is going to be my last slide. So I just wanted to say that what we propose in here is not to have equation, but rather to have directly and learn directly from data semantic behaviors of dynamical systems, which help us understand change under different types of initial conditions, where the asymptotes lie, where there are inflection points, and learn this directly on the basis of data, circumventing the need of learning the equation. And we are quite excited about this because in many scenarios, you may need the equations, but in many scenarios, you may not. What you end up with is something that's very interpretable, and in the end, the final goal of analyzing. And you can learn this from data in a much more efficient way than when you try to learn symbolic. So hopefully I intrigued you to take a look at some of the papers of brilliant Krzysztof Kacprzyk, my PhD student, that is graduating relatively soon, unfortunately for me, so I don't know how I'm going to do without him. So I hope that I intrigue some of you and collaborate such that I can move the frontier a little bit further. Thanks a lot.